Hello and welcome to session 6 of the Wellbeing journey. Today we're looking at relational wellbeing, and I'm going to be heading up north to chat to Paul McGee, and Simon is in London with Rachel Jordan-Wolfe. Now, throughout our lives we schedule our time, our energy, our commitments, our jobs and many aspects of who we are around the people we spend time with. Now, those connections are absolutely key to our overall well-being. Relationships really do matter, but not all relationships are the same, are they, Simon?
Spot on, Joanna, because I've experienced, as I'm sure you have, a wide range of different relationships over the years, the most valuable ones being those I've invested the time in, those who've invested in me, those whom I've done life with. And yet I also love meeting new people, like my work colleagues, the guys behind the cameras here, and sometimes just random people at the school gate or maybe at parties. These are also really important relationships. So what is this need for connection all about, and why is it so important to our well-being? Well, I'm off to Shoreditch to see Rachel Jordan-Wolfe, who's going to help answer some of these questions. This is lovely, Rachel. Back garden? Eh?
Well, this is the park, that is the back garden.
Oh, that's the back garden.
Yeah, but liking this setup. I feel like a little kind of outside lounge could be jolly handy.
You'd be talking differently if this was January, let me tell you that. Let's talk about relationships. How important are they to our overall sense of well-being?
Critical, I think, would be a really simple answer. But it's really interesting, actually, when you study relationships, the people like psychologists look at them, how vitally important they are to us. I mean, in my own personal life, I look back and I think, where would I be without my closest family and friends? So ultimately, the reason the relationships are so important is because of how God made us. It's not an accident. And that's because God is actually a relational being.
Yeah. Did God wire us to be in relationships?
Right way back, at the very beginning of how everything began, there is a relationship of love and mutual concern and understanding. God then said, I'm going to make people in my image. So because we're in God's image and we look like God and are like God, we have that relational hardwiring right in us to be at our best with loving, mutual understanding relationships, just like God at the core of our being. And so we're hardwired for a relationship with God, vertical relationship, and a horizontal relationships with other people. And actually we need both of those to be healthy and for our ultimate well-being.
But when it comes to relationships, it's not a numbers game, is it? Because you'll hear people, I've got 200 friends on Facebook. But actually what's more important, surely, is it's the strength of those relationships rather than the number.
Yeah, so there's a psychologist called Henry Cloud who wrote a book called The Power of the Other. And in that, he talks a bit like pseudo connection, which is a bit like what you were saying. We've got 200 friends on Facebook, surely this is working for me, pseudo good connection. But actually, you've kind of got this plethora of relationships, but none of them are actually good enough. They're temporary, they're superficial, they're not a place you can be your authentic self. In fact, they're often a place where you're your guarded self. You're maybe just putting your best image forward. And so what we're all made for is something called true connection. That is the place which you can do with a few people, which is when you're your real self or your authentic self, a place of both mutual love and understanding, where you can do your, the deep things when it's not working, when life isn't good, as well as the good things, and a place where you could be suitably vulnerable, and that is true connection. And actually, we do need to make sure that we've got that true connection in our lives.
Rachel, there may be some people watching this who will listen to you and us talking about having different groups of friends like Jesus did, those that we are able to be open, honest and vulnerable with, and they'll be going, I've not got a single friend, let alone different groups of friends. What do we say to them when we're talking about the importance of relationships to well-being?
Well, God, in his great plan, he planned something called the church. The church has an amazing group of people. That's what it is, actually. At heart, it isn't the building. Often we can make that mistake about these buildings that we see. We can call them churches. That isn't what the church is. The church is a beautiful family of really amazing people who are trying to follow the plan of God for their lives. And the invitation goes out from God to join his church. Actually, when we follow Jesus, we become part of that family. And the words that God the Father uses to describe us are actually, we're all brothers and sisters. And that's how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be within church like a really intimate family. Now, obviously, not on a scale, if you go to the church, some churches have quite a lot of people in them. Yeah. You can't know all the people that well. But within that group, we're supposed to belong to a group, if you like, a smaller group that could be like family for us. And so the invitation goes to anyone who is lonely and who's struggling with friendship. Why don't you come and try the church? And within that group, there'll be one or two people that actually you can be vulnerable with, you can trust your life with, you can begin to build relationships that last for a lifetime, friendships that last for a lifetime, actually brothers and sisters, because that was God's idea. The church is a family.
Rachel, so much to reflect on. Thank you so much. And as we do reflect on what Rachel's been saying, I think it's worth recognising that we just can't be everyone to everybody, but who fits into what level, because we're all going to have relationships in which we're struggling and those relationships that are absolutely flourishing. The key question though is which of the relationships worth investing in most. Well, Joe's been heading north to find out a little bit more.
It's so good to be in your kitchen.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with this kitchen. I'd love to say I built it myself, but I didn't. But it's all right.
We are talking about relational well-being. So I want to know the relationship between you and your kitchen. How strong is it? How strong is the bond?
Is my wife going to see this filming?
I mean, there's a chance that she might.
I love this kitchen, and I love eating in this kitchen and enjoying all the delicious meals my wife makes in this kitchen. So I have a very strong emotional, relational bond to it.
Bond. Now, so tell me, now you've been thinking a lot about relational well-being, and I just want to know, how important is it to our overall well-being?
Well, it's interesting. You saw Milo, my cat, earlier, my lovely cat. And what's interesting about Milo is when he was born as this little kitten, he latches onto his mum for a little bit of milk, and before you know it, weeks later, he's independent and he's away from his mum. And creatures can be a little bit like that. But when you think about when we're born completely helpless. We are dependent on others for our survival. But then I think from an emotional point of view, you could almost argue we need people to help us survive, particularly when we're very young and vulnerable. But we need relationships to thrive in terms of our emotional well-being. It's just inbuilt into our very DNA that we need people. I have to use the phrase, humans need humans.
Yeah. So not all relationships are the same. There's different kind of levels of relationship. Talk to us about what they look like and how to navigate those.
I think it's a really good question, because we do have different kinds of relationships, and you've got those very intimate, what you might call your inner circle. One of the things that I think can easily happen is we take for granted that these relationships that we have will automatically be good. And I often use this phrase, no investment, no return. And sometimes what happens is you're so busy looking after the peripheral relationships, those more social connections, sometimes those acquaintances, that sometimes then you neglect the real key relationships. And I spend a lot of time speaking at events, and one of the things that I've realised in my marriage, you know, my intimate relationship with my wife and with my two children, is that at times I thought my clients got the best of me, but my family got the dregs of me. And so, hang on a minute, you're investing in certain relationships, which is good, but at what cost, at what price? And it's important to keep on never taking those intimate, close relationships for granted. You know, there's that phrase, the grass is always greener where it's watered. Yeah. And therefore, I think there needs to be, I mean, I talk about, I call it a life blend model. And part of that blend is about your work, it's about your contribution, your giving, about your recreation, but it's also about your relationships. And just being mindful. Every week I will reflect on those 4 quadrants, and the one that often can get overlooked if I'm not careful is about those relationships, because we're so caught up in the pace of life and the busyness of life and the challenges that are placed on us. And yet I would say this, our biggest source of joy as well as our biggest source of pain, comes from our relationships. It really does.
Often those relationships can cause conflict. You know, sometimes we're in relationships with people and we don't always see things the same way. How would you advise us how to navigate that?
Well, you know, I'm an absolutely outstanding. Please take a sip.
Oh, thank you.
Because you are just about to. It's fine. You just blow. Okay. Just smell the aroma.
Okay, I'm smelling it.
But to illustrate what my answer to your question, in my oven, I have a beach ball.
Of course you do.
Of course you do. Where else would a man from the north keep a beach ball? But the reason why I explain this is, imagine that we've got an issue between us. We're talking about something. But what's really interesting is, from your perspective, you're seeing the same issue, this metaphor of the beach ball, but you're seeing red, yellow and orange. And as far as you're concerned, those are the three colours. You're seeing red, yellow and orange. That's your perspective. And yet I'm looking at the very same issue as you, and I'm seeing blue, white and green. And where the conflict can occur is because we believe that, well, if I'm seeing things one way and you're seeing them another, we can't be both right. One of us has to be wrong, and it's clearly not me who's wrong, it's clearly you. And yet one of the things I talk about is, let's take some time out to understand and appreciate where other people are coming from, and just take a little bit of time out to understand their side of the beach ball.
Yeah.
And to appreciate that there's all kinds of things that influence why we see things differently. You know, our baggage, our beliefs, our personality, our age, even just where we're at emotionally that day. But also to recognise that it's okay sometimes to see things differently from each other, and you might not even agree ultimately. But does it mean automatically one of us has to be wrong? Because sometimes, you know, you can maybe both be right.
Yeah.
And it's about, understanding. All right, that's very kind of you. You're catching on very, very quickly. But it's about me understanding your side of the beach ball, but it's also me turning it around so you clearly see my perspective.
Yeah.
Because I think we can make an assumption that people are mind readers, and they're not.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems in terms of our relationships is, I think, at times having unrealistic expectations.
All of this stuff, when we're not getting it right, sometimes we're not seeing things from each other's perspective, it can lead to a lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness, a lot of broken relationships. How do we navigate that when it just has gone too far, and we need to stop and actually address some of the brokenness in our lives?
Sure, I think yes, we do need to forgive, but that isn't just a one moment instant act, it's an ongoing process. And I think forgiveness, believe it or not, is not actually to benefit the other person or the other party. It's ultimately to benefit you. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you instantly feel better, because it is a process to work through. But there's this phrase, life can leave you bitter or it can make you better. And that ultimately is a choice, and it's a hard one because we want to punish the other person for hurting us. But I think what we don't always appreciate is that when we're trying to punish someone else, we're actually punishing ourselves even more.
Yeah. It's been really good chatting to you, Paul, and my tea's still really hot.
Oh, one little tip.
Yeah, go on.
One final tip. So don't forget, you want the beach ball on 180, 30 minutes. Okay. Don't make the tea too hot if it's for a southerner, because they're a little bit not as sensitive as men. But here's another little phrase, because we love our technology, but let me just leave you with this one. In a world of iPhones and iPads, don't ever underestimate the impact and the importance of eyeballs.
I like that.
It's a good one, isn't it?
I'm gonna use that. Can I use it?
Yeah, okay, it's even better than me tea.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It was so good chatting to Paul. I love his story, and it gives me hope that even though we might have broken, painful relationships in our lives, or things that have happened to us that aren't right, we don't have to let those things define us. It's really, really great. But now I'm in here in Liverpool, which is a little bit wet, but I'm going to meet Kate Wharton, who is the vicar of St Bartholomew's Church. who's going to chat to us a little bit more about relational wellbeing. Kate, it's so nice to be here in your church. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're really welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, we're loving it. We've been thinking about relational well-being, and I just wanted to get your take on why is it so important? Why it's so important for us to have good relationships?
Well, relationships are just so important, aren't they, to all of life? We see it right at the beginning of the Bible when we hear God say, it's not good for the man to be alone. And actually, I think that's true for all of us. It's not good for us to be alone. And relationships of any sort are important, I think, and that might be family relationships, that might be friends, colleagues, people at church, people like neighbours, but we all need other people in our lives. We need people to connect with, people who know us.
Yeah, our relationships don't just happen, do they? Sometimes they need a little bit of work. So talk to us about how you can identify the relationships to invest in and the ones that are just, the different types of relationships that we can have.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. It's a great question, isn't it? Because there are lots of different types of relationships. Not every relationship is the same. We can't invest to the same degree in every relationship. And probably throughout our lives, we'll have loads and loads of different friendships and different relationships, and that's okay. There's a question about what it is that we're looking for in a friendship, and that can help us to work out which ones we invest in at different times. So there might be people who are in our lives for a particular season because we're going through a particular experience together. You might have a really good friend while you're doing a college course.
Yeah.
There might be friends that you've met because you're going through a particular life, especially with having a baby at the same time, you become friends. You might stay friends forever, but you might not.
Yeah.
But I think there are some friendships that are the strong, kind of long-lasting friendships that live with us for a long time, that we really do invest in and make the effort to try to grow and nurture and encourage. And I think it can be very hard, can't it? If you're struggling with your own well-being, your own mental health, your own self-esteem, it obviously is hard to make a new friend, because that requires building up your courage and stepping out and going for it, and you might not feel able to do that. So I think that's hard, and I think that's where communities can help a bit. Right. So, one of those might be the church community, or it might be a workplace community, or a family community, or whatever. But I think a community of people that sort of gathers around and almost facilitates friendship in some way, and I think helps people to build up their own individual confidence and courage, and also to build up their own well-being and their own resilience.
Right. Yeah, you talked about resilience. And so what about when things in our friendships, or with family members, we fall out? How can we move forward from that?
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? I think a friend of mine, I'm not sure this is a real word, but I think it ought to be a real word. A friend of mine talks about not being offendable. So we should try to be people who are not offendable.
Nice.
And I think that's a really kind of biblical, godly kind of characteristic, actually, to not be somebody who easily takes offence, and so to be somebody who forgives easily, who is willing to be reconciled. And I think, again, like I said earlier, the need for openness and honesty. Sometimes you just got to name those things, and I'm really a fan of that, of just kind of naming the stuff. So naming it when we've done something wrong. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I know that I said that thing that I shouldn't have done. I know that I spoke to somebody else about you instead of coming to you. I know that whatever it is, I'm sorry, and just being fully honest about that. But then equally the other way around, being willing to say, that's okay, I'm sorry, let's draw a line under that, let's move on. So I think there's a real need. I think the difficulty comes when we do just bear that grudge, and when we kind of get a bit passive aggressive. I'm not going to mention it, it's fine, it's all fine. It's not fine, but it can be fine if we talk about it and sort
bring it out into the open. I love that we can be the ones to say sorry as well. I think people are often just waiting, aren't they, for somebody else to apologise to me for that, but actually we all have our part to play in it. Relationships are two-way. Let's just touch on the use of social media and how can that affect our relational well-being?
So many effects, I think. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? I love social media. I'm an extrovert and I live on my own. And sometimes those things happen and you just think, I just want to tell someone this. And I post things on social media, and it's kind of quite nice because people can respond.
Yeah.
And I really like it. But it can't actually be everything we need relationally.
Yeah, and not looking for our affirmation from it, I suppose, if
Absolutely.
they're not people that we really know. Kate, it's been so good chatting to you. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
thank you for the tea.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Relational well-being, that's how we do. That's how we go. Are you rolling? Up the floor. All right, okay. Tell me when you're ready. It's been great to chat to Kate. I'm heading back down south to catch up with Simon, and boy, have I learned a lot today.
Come on, Ian, how much does that weigh?
It's a fair odd weight.
Yeah, it's good for the guns, isn't it? You keep telling us about the guns, eh?
Good for the show. You got your tickets?
No, listen, Joanna, we're working honestly, but being serious for a moment, the working environment that we find ourselves in a lot of the time can be a really, really good place.
Come on, guys, let's crack on.
I was going to say build good relationships. I've got a bossy director, I'm coming. Happy now, Jay?
Crack on, fella.
He's a top bloke, really. Being vulnerable is something that is so important in healthy relationships, but if I'm honest, particularly as men, it's not something we're always comfortable with. You know, my closest friends have seen me in the worst possible states. I think back to 2017 when my wife died very suddenly. My friends were alongside me when I was at my most broken, my most vulnerable. I was a hard guy to love in those weeks and months after those events of November 2017. And I guess the love they showed me was all about the relationship they had with me. They cared for me and they were okay to sit alongside me when I was vulnerable and broken. They showed me love. And you know, in all relationships, loving someone when it's going well isn't particularly hard, but loving them when things aren't going so well is a whole lot harder. You might be feeling there's one particular relationship, or actually at the moment, a number of relationships that you want to focus on following this session. You know, it's funny how sometimes we suddenly think about someone. Maybe it's someone we haven't heard from in ages, but something just prompts us to get back in touch. Or maybe someone is right at the forefront of your thinking right now, and you're like, I need to speak to them. Oh, hello, Joe.
Simon.
Welcome back, Joanna. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Oh.
That was massively enthusiastic, but it is genuine. It's like a genuine relationship. I mean
That
it.
was very Blue Peter.
Oh, don't remind me. It's been so long. We're rolling back the years. How was it?
Yeah, it was really, really good. I've had a great time.
What have you taken from it?
I chatted to Paul McGee earlier, and I loved. He did this thing with the beach ball.
Yeah.
And how you can look at something from one side of it and see something completely different to what I'm seeing, but if we turn it around, we can see each other's perspectives. And I think that's really important to remember. There's not always a right or wrong, but just stepping out of ourselves and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes can be really important in our relationships, so that we're not clashing heads all the time, that we just step back and think, well, how might you be seeing this situation? It can just eliminate a lot of conflict, which is really good. But the other thing, I know you said one thing, but I'm just giving you
No, you go for it.
was just the fact that I really feel like our relationships are really worth working on. It's kind of like my garden. Like if I just leave it, it's going to be weeds central, which it has been for a long time, although now we've got gravel. But actually it needs constant time and investment for it to stay nice and to stay healthy. And just like that with my friendships and my relationships, even with my family members, I need to kind of keep investing in them, and I'm really up for that. So yeah, that's what I'm taking away.
And I think that is so true, because we get kind of sold this narrative that relationships just happen like that. That you just say it's a marriage or a partnership, you just fall in love and it's all rosy from there on in. But like looking after your garden or looking after your car, getting MOT and serviced every year, you've got to invest in it, and you've got to invest in relationships, because when the tough times come, you're able to surf the storm a bit better.
Yeah. I wonder what these guys have taken away from today's session. Have a think about what you can do in your relationships. Maybe there's somebody who you need to get in touch with. Why don't you do that now?
Next week, we'll focus on money and how our attitude to our finances can have serious implications on our well-being.
Well done.
Nice bit of rugby playing there.
Yeah, well, that was good.
Hey church, and welcome to our conversation. I hope you just enjoyed that session. I thought it was incredible. And I'm actually joined by two very good friends. We are relationally strong, and we're going to be talking about relationships, some of the things that we can learn, some of the things we can put in place. So I've got Pete with me, Pete Reeves.
Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you. Better known as Revo. Hey, and I've also got a good friend Lydia as well here.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
It's good to have you guys. Nice to meet you. It's like I've never met you before. But we're going to have a conversation. Both of you guys got different backgrounds, come from kind of different places. And also, I think the one thing that's interesting is you guys have only been in the church for how long between you kind of?
So I've been here a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just over a year.
Just
so
over
a couple of years now, yeah.
So, but in this time, we've kind of got to know each other, all of us really well, can have our own serving and just being at church service together. And I think you guys are perfect people to talk about why relationships are so important. So let's kick that off. Why do we need to be relationally healthy? What's the importance of relational well-being?
So for me as a Christian, I know that we are made in God's image, and God says it's not good for men to be on their own. So as a Christian, I want to be really intentional about relationships because they are good.
Yeah, that's an awesome one. I think that really just sums it up from the get-go. God wants us to be in a relationship with him, relationship with others. Pete, talk to me about kind of,
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I've obviously been in and around, well, it's not obviously, I've been in and around sales roles for most of my career. So it's really important to have strong relationships. But I've also done loads of bits and pieces for charity, and I really enjoy helping other people out. So I'm very intentional in my relationship building.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've definitely seen for you. I know when you first started coming to church, that was pre-lockdown and stuff, and you were just always bringing people with you because you were like, I want people to experience church. So that ever since you kind of, who you are, is you have a lot of friends, and you also love Jesus, and you keep bringing people into church, which is an incredible thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think that for me, I'm still on my journey, but it was quite clear the messages in and around Soul Church spoke really deep into me. So I'm still enjoying it, and this is part of my kind of payback. And yeah, I'm bringing people where I think, oh yeah, that message, I really like that message, you know, and there's a lot of really good stuff.
Okay, so just kind of off the back of that, how do you make sure we have authentic relationships? Because you can have a lot of relationships, we can meet people, but how do you have a relationship where you can invite someone to something and say, hey, come to church, come be part of this, or have an honest conversation with someone? How do we go from that surface level to being intentional?
Well, from my point of view, quite early on in my life, somebody said to me, and I can't remember who it was, how should you treat somebody else? And the standard answer is, you should always treat them as you would expect to be treated yourself. Yeah. Was my answer, and it is the wrong answer, because you need to find out how the person that you're transacting with wants to be treated.
Yeah, that's great.
Because if you've got a low value of yourself, or you don't want to be treated in a particular way, then that hampers you. So you need to understand how the other person wants to be treated, because we're all individuals.
Yeah, and I think we had a conversation about this earlier, but one of the things that you said is the power of listening. And
yeah, 100%. 2 ears and 1 mouth. So it needs to be in that order.
Yeah. Lydia, one of the things that we were talking about was the idea of the afterglow. Now, you said this, and I was like, that's brilliant. So could you just kind of talk us through that thought?
Yes, of course I can. So the afterglow is my description of kind of the taste I leave in people's mouths when I've been with them. Do I leave a bitter taste, or do I leave a sweet taste? What is my afterglow? And I think it's quite important to be considerate of that and be thinking, right, I want to leave my friend uplifted. I don't want to drag them down. I don't want to be a heavy weight for them to carry. And I want to be building relationships, leave a good afterglow, and be a dream builder, so I can come alongside my friends, walk the journey with them through life, and help build their dreams with them.
And you definitely are that, Lydia, because if you ever know Lydia, and I'm sure many of you do, you'd all be saying that is exactly who you are, which is awesome. So we'll talk about relationships, they're important, but one of the things that can come up, and they spoke about it in the session, is conflict. Now, a healthy relationship is going to experience an amount of conflict, but what are some of the ways that we can help kind of overcome, navigate, find our way through those things?
Well, I can answer this one. So I loved the analogy of the beach ball, and it's about the perspective. So am I right? Am I actually wrong? Does it matter if I'm right or wrong, or are we both right? And I think picking your battles is really important. I think as a friend, if somebody asks me my opinion, then I'll be honest. It's really important to be honest. Be tough on the issue, but gentle on the friend. And I think that's really important. If in friendships, if somebody isn't asking for your opinion, don't give it.
Yeah.
That's my advice. Just love the person, pick out their good parts, and really encourage them.
And I know from experience, sometimes I can see something and I'm like, oh, I want to speak into that. I want to challenge it. I want to address it. But sometimes just time, isn't it? And it's just going through the miles with them, and eventually they're going to turn around and say, hey, Revo, can you speak on this?
Yeah, I would add to that as well. I think that often what happens, the person knows the answer anyway.
Yeah.
And they know that they've made a mistake. And it is, as you've alluded to, giving them that time and space. And I think as Christians, you have that super luxury of having God on your team. So you do create that space. You do spend time with him.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps as a non-Christian or a new Christian, the press pause analogy is really useful. And we're also not very good at asking people open questions. So it would be, well, how would you feel if this happened? Why do you think that happened? What do you want to do about it? How, where, why, what, when?
Yeah.
And that's a really good way of building rapport and helping somebody get some building blocks into conflict resolution.
Yeah. Because I also think, that idea of actually the pressing pause, the asking the open questions, and then just sitting there with it. Just allowing it to sit. And because that's when my strongest friendships are the ones that we can sit and be quiet with. And we don't feel the need to speak. We don't feel the need to do some of those things. Lydia, you talk about boundaries. We had a conversation. We talk about boundaries, and talk to me a little bit about it. Boundaries often seem like a professional thing. Maybe in business, you put boundaries in. Don't enter my office. Send me an email before you talk to me. But you're actually saying no. They're not only in the business world. We can bring them into our relational world.
Absolutely. So Dr. Henry Cloud talks a lot about boundaries, and boundaries define who I am. They stick a line in the sand that shows where I end and somebody else begins. Not all relationships are healthy, and sometimes relationships can go through patches where they become a little bit unhealthy, a little bit unwell, and then you need to do some work to pull them back. But if you have somebody who's constantly crossing over your boundaries, boundaries are there to protect you. They protect your heart. They protect your treasures. Yeah. And if you've got somebody constantly coming over, that needs to be issued. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable. You have to have these uncomfortable conversations. But then also there's a realization that sometimes you have to draw the line and think, actually, is this a relationship that I need to continue on? Is it going to be good for my well-being?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Lots of people fight against change all their life, but that is the one certainty. And I think within conflict resolution, you need to be giving people the time, but when it's your issue, you have got to own it. So you kind of got to be a bit brave with it. But for me, one of my pieces of advice would be, let's try and make this a bit of fun. Let's get ourselves in a situation.
You are fun, Revo.
What can I say? But let's put, it can be really difficult. They can be doing, I don't know, I'll make it the last piece of food on my plate. And you can tell I'm a bit of a food eater. And it would be the person who I'm in a relationship with, or it might be a mate, would nick my last chip.
It's like your last Rolo.
Oh, yeah. And they're always the best ones.
We really hit some hard topics.
Yeah, but it could be, it's obviously a lot more controversial than that, but then using like a good news, bad news, good news sandwich, making some fun about it in the right time with the right environment helps. So kind of sandwiching your messages.
Yeah.
So, I'm really looking forward to, we've been at the gym and we're now going to go to the McDonald's on the way, having got ourselves super fit. But I'm going to order more chips for you this time because you always nick my last chip. And you can kind of the banter sometimes in amongst your friends
Can help set a culture.
you can get some messages across.
One of the things, obviously for you, Reva, you've got 2 grown-up sons. And one of the things that's noticeable is that you always seem to be having a lot of fun with them. I've seen you driving sports cars, I've seen you do all sorts. And is that something, because I know with my dad, we're now grown ups, often say he's now kind of like a mate figure. But for you, is that something important, having fun, to have a strong relationship?
I mean, talking to relationships and then as a parental relationship, please can somebody give me a book? Because there isn't one. And I think there's so many, especially dads, are finding their way and are wrapped up in an ego world, which almost kind of chains them down. And there comes a point when actually you can't tell a 24-year-old, have you cleaned your teeth? Have you done this? Have you done that? Put the plate in the dishwasher. So you have to take control of the change as a dad, because you want to be there for your son. And your role then becomes more of a friendship.
Yeah.
And that is very much around family. And again, it helps in faith.
And would you say kind of learning those skills, because I know for your family, you've gone through some trauma in that sense, so you can open up and talk about those things while you're having fun, while you're having those moments where it's like, actually almost allows a safe place to be really real and really honest with one another.
Yeah, we have dealt with some difficult circumstances, but we also have some difficult conversations, again, at the right time. You know, are you tired? Is it late at night? And have you had a couple of beers? Because to me, we definitely don't want to be having a conversation at this point.
Yeah.
You know, we've been out for a run, we just come back on a Saturday morning, and we're going to have a nice breakfast, and the sun is shining. Yeah, let's kick around some tough stuff now. Yeah. We're in a good place.
Because you're emotionally strong and emotionally healthy. And I think that's something that
timing is crucial.
Yeah, I think that's something I've really learned over the kind of lockdown, also actually pre this Wellbeing series, about emotional health. I always thought about physical health and maybe spiritual health, but the emotional well-being and friendships, they can take on, like, it can be heavy sometimes, can't it? You need to be emotionally healthy. Okay, one of the things I want to touch on, because I know a lot of people watching, maybe they're new to church like you guys, but between you guys, you've been here for a year. You started coming to church during lockdown, right, Lydia? That was...
Yeah, just before, yeah.
How many Sundays did you get in? About
2.
2 Sundays.
Yeah.
And so that's incredible. It shows how you've actually formed and found a friendship and a family within the church. Talk to me, though, about what is the role of the church in relationships?
Well, obviously the church is a family, they've said it in the video, and God places the lonely in family. It says it in Psalm 68. And actually, what's really important is that you can come as you are. And there are lots of groups in church. And I think what's really important to say is if you start in a group and you don't feel it's the right one for you, it's okay to try and find another one.
Because sometimes it can feel a bit awkward, can't it?
Yeah, a little bit awkward. But it's absolutely okay. Find another one. Keep trying until you find, there is a place at this table and it's got your name on it. And just keep coming. This is your
advice.
home.
That's great advice. And I would say the same. I'm involved in probably half a dozen groups. So I can't be in all of them all of the time. So that kind of almost gives me my excuse to not turn up. But one of the things I think we do need to be careful with is turning up. And I think it's important to set a date, to set a time and get active. The groups within Soul are fantastic and they're good fun. We run a Wellbeing group. Kev James is kind of one of my best mates in the church, great Norwich City fan. And I would say to anybody, we run a Wellbeing group called Thrive. And we've shared some really difficult subjects. And we've also talked about how to make cauliflower soup. We'll have a bit of fun with it. And it's faith-filled. So, we'll always try and bring a message or a prayer or both. It's great. But I would say to anybody even if you're not necessarily involved, get active in groups.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's awesome. Okay, and finally, I think it's probably one area we really need to hit on, because right now, during a pandemic, online social media is the way so many of us are relating to one another, keeping updated with one another. Talk to us maybe, what are some of the great things we can do, what are some of the not so great things we can do to make sure we stay healthy in our relational well-being? I don't know who wants to go first.
So obviously social media definitely has its place. It keeps us connected. It's how we are interacting and socializing now. I think you do have to be careful. So I had an experience 5 years ago where one of my friends said to me, "But your life looks so perfect on Facebook." It was at that time the furthest from the truth that it could be. I was very isolated, lonely, and just cut off. And actually, that was a massive wake-up call for me, because I don't want other people to feel that by something that I've posted. I think it can, if you're not careful, social media can start the cycle of comparison, and then that leads to uncontentment. And I kind of felt if I could do that with my Facebook posts, probably 9 times out of 10, the other posts that I'm looking at may not be completely true. So it's having that pinch of salt element to what you're looking at.
The realness.
The realness.
Make sure we're real online.
Yeah, you need to make sure that you're in control of it rather than it be in control of you. And also, I think you just be careful where you go, because if you're putting in, I don't know, let's look at anti-vaxxers. I think it's crazy. But as soon as you look, then all of the social platforms will try and send you that kind of message.
Yeah, you see the social dilemma, isn't
So
it?
spend some time, if you're struggling right now, spend some time looking at faith-filled posts. If you really enjoy Turkey as a venue, look at places to eat in Turkey, places to sunbathe in Turkey, and then that'll start to come through for you. You know, so you're driving it rather than it drives you. And I think that the message is, because you've said, we now need it more than ever in this season. Send messages to all of your chums and the positive people in your life. Yeah. Reach out to them and think about those messages like you would a Christmas present. Don't buy gift vouchers with your messages. It's not the same. Really make them intentional. Aim them at the person. And that can be as simple as a picture of the pair of you, or an event, or something that you used to do together. You know, let's start to connect on a new level.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm 100%
And
behind
the
that.
video was saying that with the increase of iPhones and iPads, it's really important to eyeball.
Yeah.
And yes, we're in lockdown, but you can pick up the phone, you can FaceTime someone, and that's just really important to have that connection.
Yeah, definitely.
I really struggle with FaceTime.
Yeah.
I've got a face for radio, but I'm getting used to it now. But I do, and I'm looking at myself in the little box down the bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah.
And it was only the other day that I realised you can actually move it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's...
Yeah, and on...
It's a game changer.
Yeah, and the other one, on Zoom, you can actually close it, which is great. Because I know completely, we all fall into that trap. We look at our hair, we do everything. And then the other... Oh, sorry. Looking at the hat, glasses. And one thing that someone told me is moving the box that you said you can move around, put it up to the top near your camera. Because that means every time you do just fall into a bit of vanity and you're looking at it, you're actually looking into the camera and you're looking in their eyes.
Now that's gold. That is a great tip.
There you go. We've covered everything today.
We have.
And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I know you'll just give some love to Reva and Lydia in the comments. But guys, thanks for taking time out.
Thank you.
To hang out and talk about this.
Thanks.
And hey, we love you, church.